Dear all, thanks, first of all, my thanks extended to the organizers for bringing me to this event. It's very, very important. The timing is especially important, and it's a big honor to be here. Where, it's one more general remark, it's not easy to listen to something scientific after the lunch. So I'm talking from my own experience, but those are the rules of the game. Here we'll speak about... I will talk about the investigation of this so-called Soviet Extraordinary Commission. It had a very long name, to investigate crimes committed and damaged cost. But before we approach the subject itself, I would say that first, let's do it in an orderly way. The thing that astonished me very many years ago when I started to study this topic, Soviet investigations under the auspice of this commission, was why did they decide to investigate and use a legal mechanism to punish all those accused of having collaborated, if we're talking about the local population or having been involved in the crimes, if we're talking about the Germans and their allies. The Soviet Union at that time, especially, could not boast of, I would say, exemplary human rights record, and given the conditions of the war, they had, I would say, probably even moral right to do it in a very speedy way. But it was a striking feature of this regime, which chose consciously to persecute its enemies, imagined and real, using legal methods. We can argue a big deal about how legal were the legal methods, but in striking contrast to, let's say, Nazi Germany, which exterminated millions of people without having recourse to legal methods. They simply disappeared after being designated as Jews. Here we have family name, and more or less the article of the criminal code, and some background story, and still I would say it is striking, given their record and given everything we know about how this regime functioned, especially at that period of time, especially under Joseph Stalin. Now, when we talk about Soviet investigations, we should bear in mind that it was, of course, a process. During the war, it was a short process, relatively short, because of the conditions of the war, because, to put it otherwise, everyone was in a hurry. And also because this was the way, I would say, the short procedure that the Soviet investigators got used to prior to the war. After the war, their investigations will become lengthier and will become more detailed and arguably more reliable, or at least what I would say, it's definitely they're more interesting for researchers. But here in my talk, I will focus on wartime investigations. So we're talking more or less about the war, the period of the war, and the investigations conducted within the framework of this commission started more or less after the Soviets liberate the bulk of the occupied territories that had been previously occupied by Nazi Germany and its friends. Verdicts, if we are talking about the war period, were more or less in contrast. I would say the investigations were short, but the verdicts were even shorter. And from a research point of view, they are of less interest because basically people were, as a rule, accused of having collaborated with the enemy, and unless they were heavily involved in killing people, Soviet citizens or prisoners of war, partisans, they usually got the maximum verdict, maximum sentence that existed at that time, from 10 years to 25 years of hard labor. If, of course, they were accused of having been involved in killing people, then they could receive a death sentence, provided there was still a death sentence. There was some period of time when there was a ban, the Soviet-imposed ban on using this sentence. So to sum up this small introductory section, of course, this was judging by the Western legal standards. It was a distorted legal process, but still it was legal. It was legal, and that's why, and because of it, thanks to it, we have an enormous bulk of material, which we can use, we can criticize, we can disagree with, and of course, given the very scope of their investigations, they try to investigate everything. Put their hands on, every criminal, and no other institution, no other agency could conduct it in real time at that time. But of course, as after time passed, it became even less realistic. Regarding the Soviet motives, I will probably get back to this issue a bit later. Why did they decide it? Why did they think along legal lines? So, of course, the basic idea that, I would say, hovered over the Soviet, the functioning of this commission was punishment. All these people who took part in the anti-Soviet activities, whatever it meant, had to be punished. And, of course, there was idea of a revenge. The Soviet Union, this Bolshevik regime had very many sins, but forgetfulness was not one of them. They had a very good memory, and the functioning of this commission with its outcome is a very clear proof of how it worked. The commission was officially came into being on March 5th, 1943. Was put into effect as a result of the Soviet Supreme Council published a decree. What is interesting is the timing. Why March? Why 1943? There were several events that preceded the establishment of this commission, and they were international events, namely the joint declaration published by the US President Franklin Roosevelt and Lord Halifax on the future persecution of war criminals by the UN. And of course, the Soviets wanted to, I would say, to be synchronized at least with these international developments, and probably even to forestall it by being able to provide illegal incriminating materials once this UN commission would come into being. And of course, there were internal development. The Soviets started, the Red Army, renamed Soviet Army, started to liberate territories. Most of the territories that the Wehrmacht had been able to occupy in 1941. And they, so to say, they had what to investigate and where to investigate. So it was a perfect timing from their calculation. The investigation of human losses. This is more or less the only category in the long list of the claims that this commission was supposed to ascertain. The human losses, whether among the civilian population or among the prisoners of war, did not figure prominently in this list of these claims, and they were definitely overshadowed by material damage. Material damage, and we should keep it in mind. I would say material damage caused to public institutions, public property, and so on and so forth, and only after it they appeared human losses. I would say one can, of course, from today's perspective, attribute it to Soviet cynicism, when money figured weight more than human life. On the other hand, we can also say that at that time it was not exactly understandable, not exactly clear to the Soviet leadership how human losses, the enormity of these human losses, could be translated to future claims they would have against Nazi Germany after the end of the war. It was much easier to understand how it worked with material damage. This was a very interesting commission because it was staffed, at least its lead administrator was staffed by public figures. And so far we can speak about public figures in the Soviet Union. It was headed by Nikolai Shvernik, who was the head of the trade union, the only official trade union in the Soviet Union, the member of Politburo. Not an important person, but certainly not one of the big wigs there. And there were also public figures in the first, I would say, 10 leading persons, priests, scholars, and so on and so forth. But behind the scenes, we know that the powerful local commissions at the level of the Republic were staffed by the people who exert real power on the ground, party and security leaders in these places. So, but officially, no one could see their names, but this is how this organization was supposed to function, and that it was staffed, in fact, was led by Soviet heavyweights, let's say, party and security officials, is understandable. Less understandable is the fact why, they decided out of the blue to create a public commission. The idea was they already thought about future claims, and they understood that in order to score points with the Western public opinion, the commission should look less state, even though its name its name contains the word "stay," and look more public, as if to represent the desire of ordinary people. So again, but at that time in the Soviet Union, one could hardly think about independent state commission. That's why, but still, and the facade definitely looked like this, like that. The commission had resources, some resources on paper, had some authority on paper. It was supposed, for example, to coordinate the activities to investigate and to estimate the damage, investigate the crimes. But since it had no local branches, because it didn't have budget for that, it had to rely on people who had branches and did have budgets, and those were Soviets. Let's call them in the Western manner law enforcement agencies. This was the guy who stood nominally at the head of the commission. This, I would say, this facet and the way it collected its material and how the big decisions were made inside the commission is very illuminating of the way it functioned. Now, how did it work, more or less? At the first stage, at the lowest level, the commission collected evidence. Again, the people who collected evidence were the people who sent their reports to the commission, and at the same time they sent more or less the same reports to their main employer, the security agencies. At the next stage, after, of course, undergoing, several stages of scrutiny by various people empowered to read these reports and make decisions, the Commission published summaries of what it was collected. It was not the low-level evidence collected, but it was the evidence that was processed several times, or edited, if you wish. They didn't publish summaries on every area, on every locality, only on what it deemed as the most important. Again, in order to, first of all, with an eye to the Western public opinion, and they also had a public opinion in the 5 minutes. Okay. Now, later, after the war, the Commission, of course, even after technically it ceased to exist, would place its findings at the disposal of Soviet courts. The Soviet courts always regarded its finding as compelling, and foreign courts, mainly West Germany and East Germany. At the same time, ordinary researchers in the Soviet Union could not see these reports. It was closed, inaccessible, and so it remained until the end of the Soviet Union. It did cooperate with the other Soviet agencies and did not cooperate with others. For example, the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee was never able to get access to, Holocaust-related material. It gives us a glimpse into the place of this commission in this Soviet structure of power. It was an important institution, but not that important. They definitely feared to make steps which were not fully authorized by decision makers. The fate of Jews did interest the Commission, we should say, and very often the Soviet officers asked those interrogated or those questioned, what do you know about the fate of the Jewish population? Or, for example, if they asked Jewish witnesses, the question could be posed like this: how come that the whole Jewish community was exterminated and you are sitting here in front of me? And so the witness had to come up with a plausible story, otherwise he himself could get into a problem. Couple of words about the Kiev Commission. It was there were many photographs. We have actually the first photographs were made almost immediately after the liberation of the city in November '43. It started collecting statements given by witnesses, Jewish and non-Jewish alike. Okay, how do I? 2 minutes clip.
Месте Киева-Дарница. Съемки операторов Орлянкина, Бровина, Шафрана. За этой колючей проволокой находился немецкий лагерь для военнопленных. Здесь погибли тысячи заключенных. Военнопленных немцы заставляли выполнять тяжелые изнурительные работы, подвергали издевательствам и убивали. Массовые расстрелы военнопленных начались незадолго до бегства немцев из Дарницы. Это трупы, извлеченные только из одного котлована в районе лагеря. В Дарнице немцы убивали и мирных граждан. Общее число убитых в Дарнице достигло 68 тысяч человек. Это киносъемки, произведенные в Киеве сразу после освобождения города от немцев 6 ноября 1943 года. На многих улицах и перекрестках расстрелянные, готовясь к бегству, немцы приступили к поголовному истреблению граждан Киева.
The Germans were bent on totally exterminating Kiev's population. Okay, and we have more or less the pictures that we are all aware of, but they were the first to take them, of course. Sometimes they already used the word Jewish, sometimes they didn't use the word Jewish in the very first preliminary investigation, so it depended, certainly dependent on the winds that blew from the Kremlin. And the final report, just 1 minute left, that summarized the finding of the low-level commission was sent by Schwernik, by this guy from the nominally headed the Soviet Commission, to Molotov, one of the most important figures in the Soviet leadership, not actually in charge of the foreign policy. He was a minister of People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs. It is not accidental because Jewish Holocaust was regarded first and foremost at that time as a matter of foreign policy. So it should be coordinated with the Soviet foreign policy at that time. Molotov did not object to the use of word Jewish, but the guy who had the final say, so the guy whose name was Sherbakov, who was in charge of ideology, the thing which was even more important than foreign policy, he objected. He ordered to delete the word Jewish citizens and replace them with the peaceful Soviet citizens. And this is the official formula the Soviet Union lived with until its demise, more or less. What is interesting is that in this report in that deals specifically in 41, they speak specifically about the events in 41, more specifically late September 41. And in this context, the absence of Jews, the absence of emphasis on the Jews is even more striking. Later on, as we know, there were many more victims, coming from other strata of the Ukrainian population, and in this context it would be more understandable. But this specific report, which was published, it was, I would say, particularly striking. Yes, and the later formula invented by the Soviet Union referred to related to all events that took place in Babi Yar. It was signed by Khrushchev, the head of the Ukrainian government at that time, and it talked about more than 100,000 people killed in Kiev during the German occupation, without, of course, reference to their ethnicity. And thank you very much for your attention.